Hello, I'm John. This is my channel Must Read More. Welcome back, or welcome if you're new. I've got a tag video for you today. It's the Rock On Rap Songs tag created by Nicole's Bookish Note, which is a channel new to me that I'll have to check out. And I was tagged by James at Quaint and Curious Volumes on the 24th of September, looks like, which is, I'm pretty far behind my tags, but I'm trying to catch up. And this is a tag. All the prompts are based on rock songs and rap songs, most of which I've heard, but there are a few I've actually never heard, so I'm pretty out of touch when it comes to contemporary music. The first prompt is, "It's a Hard Knock Life" by Jay-Z, which I have heard. A fiction or nonfiction book about an orphanage, a poor family, or an orphan. So I couldn't really think of a book that really fit that, a poor family or an orphan. I'm sure that I've read books like that, but just none of them really came to mind. But one book really did come to mind, and it's about poverty and, kids who were turned into orphans and things of that nature. The book that came to mind for me was Night Comes to the Cumberlands, a biography of a depressed area by Harry M. Cottle. And this is from 1962, I believe. Harry Cottle was a state representative, or here in the state. I'm not exactly sure what his office was, but he did serve in the government. And this is about the abuses of the coal companies in eastern Kentucky and the poverty of the people in that region, the really bad living conditions they had to endure, and the debts and the destruction of land and that kind of thing by the coal companies. It's a really good book. I read it back about 2010 or 2011, somewhere in there, but I never finished it. I probably got caught up in something else and just put it down. But I've been meaning to go back and reread this. I hope to reread this someday soon, but I've also been saying that for about a decade, but I really do want to go back and reread this. Prompt number 2, Walk This Way by Aerosmith featuring Run DMC. A favorite book of yours that blends genres. Okay, so I don't have this book anymore, but I'll put the name of it right in here and it'll run along as I'm talking. It's Dead Man's Road by Joe R. Lansdale. It mixes westerns with horror novels. They're short stories. It's a collection of short stories about this reverend who goes from place to place dealing with werewolves and zombies and Lovecraftian horrors. I just really enjoyed it. I don't have it anymore. I gave it to my grandpa, and I guess he gave it to somebody else because he never gave it back to me. So, number 3, Just Lose It by Eminem, a book that you think is funny or ridiculous in a bad way. I went with a book by Roger Shattuck called, I believe it's called Forbidden Knowledge. I don't have it anymore. I disliked it so much I got rid of it very fast. I'll put the name right here. I just didn't like Shattuck's. His idea is that there is some knowledge that needs to be hidden from regular, everyday people because they're not smart enough and they're not capable of handling it. And so the only people who should be allowed to read certain works are, people who have been to Ivy League schools, basically, and people who can handle it, like him or like Harold Bloom. And the whole thing just didn't sit right with me. It seemed to me that Shattuck took fictional representations, or he took scenes from fiction and treated them as though they were real. So he might take a scene from Frankenstein or a scene from Paradise Lost and quote that as if it was a factual, real happening. And that just really bothered me. That's like if you came to me and asked me, or you said, "Hey, I'm going to move to Maine," and then I sat down and said, "But haven't you read It and Pet Sematary? And let me read you these quotes. This is what happened to, Ben and Bev and all of them." And it just bothered me. He didn't really have, just that whole book really bothered me. And I don't have it anymore. I kind of wish that I did have it just because I dislike it so much. And uh, yeah, that was just ridiculous book, and I didn't like it. Number 4, Thunderstruck by AC/DC, a book that shocked you in a good or bad way. So the book that I'm going with is Master of Lies by Graham Masterton, right? Yes, Master of Lies by Graham Masterton. This is a novel. It takes place in the early to mid 70s in San Francisco. And it has one of the most shocking intros that I've ever read in my life. The first 20 pages or so are just shocking. There's a family having a quiet night at home, and Masterton tells us in the first sentence or the first paragraph that they're all about to be killed by this guy who's, kind of well, anyway, he's trying to do this ritual. So we sit with this family minute by minute until this guy comes into their house. And this all takes place in the first 20 pages. This is the intro to the book. And I'm not going to get graphic. It was very, very graphic how these people were killed. And it went on and on and on. And I bought this book at a Goodwill. I tried to read one of Graham Masterton's books quite a while back, and I just couldn't get into it. But it was not nearly as shocking as this one. This one was just, I had no idea what I was getting into. And those first 20 pages were, like I said, probably the most shocking intro to any book I've ever read. And it was just deeply unpleasant. It was a hard read. It was a genuinely hard read. It was hard for me to get through the first 20 pages of that book. And the rest of the book was not nearly that graphic or that violent. It was about a detective who's trying to solve these murders. And there's a guy in San Francisco who is trying to complete these ritual killings so that he can summon a demon into the world who will give him whatever he wants, basically. And it was kind of on the, in the 70s there, you had the Zodiac Killer, and it was kind of on that sort of basis. It was just too much for me. I mean, I didn't expect it. It was just a rough book, and like I said, the rest of it was not that violent. But it was just like a punch, and I didn't see it coming. Number 5, Welcome to the Jungle by Guns N' Roses, a book about LA or a book that takes place in or around LA. So I went with They Thirst by Robert R. McCammon. I believe it's by Robert R. McCammon. I'll look that up. And I didn't like it. That's the reason I don't remember it very well. And the reason for that was, well, it takes place in Los Angeles. There's something like a 250-year-old vampire who moves to a house in the Hollywood Hills, which is a famous house from a horror movie. And he starts turning people into vampires and trying to create this vampire empire. But my trouble with the book, I thought it was a good premise. I thought it was a good idea. I thought it was a good... I like most of the characters. But the main villain in that is a vampire who's been alive for 250 years, but he was turned into a vampire while he was a teenager. And he spent the last 250 or 300 years, however long, maybe not even that long. He doesn't learn anything, so he still acts like an obnoxious teenager. And that just, I did not like that at all. Because I didn't understand why these other vampires were following him. And I didn't understand, how, it just didn't make any sense that this whiny teenager, why would, he's turning other people into vampires who are clearly smarter than him. So why is he the most powerful vampire? Why is he the vampire king? I didn't understand that. But it was okay. I mean, I liked everything else about it. It's just, it seems to me that a lot of fiction writers don't really understand power dynamics. So they might have a character, like in They Thirst, the vampire talks a lot. He talks a lot about how strong he is and his power and all this and how great he is. But his actions don't ever live up to all his talking. And that's what annoyed me about that. His actions never live up to his grandiose talking and thoughts, and it just didn't work for me. Number 6, Gimme All Your Lovin' by ZZ Top. Your favorite romance book, or if you do not read romance, your favorite couple in any book. But I don't really read romance. I never have before. I've read a few kind of romantic books in the past, but the book I went through, or the book I chose for this, is David McCullough's John Adams, because I think that John and Abigail Adams were a really interesting couple. They seemed to really love each other, and they seemed to be best friends. And Abigail really seemed to kind of calm John Adams down when he needed it. She wasn't always successful. He was an intellectually vain, hot-headed kind of guy. He was easily insulted, but he openly acknowledged that Abigail was smarter than he was. I've been meaning to reread this book, and one of the interesting things about their relationship is that they spent so much time apart, and we have something like 1,200 of their letters, so we have a really intimate look at their relationship. And I'd really like to read those letters. There are several collections of their letters that I'd like to read. Number 7, Fight for Your Right to Party by the Beastie Boys, a book centered around a celebration. So for this one, I went with The Sundial by Shirley Jackson. It's a novel about this family, an extended family. They're all morose people, and they live in a big mansion. And they don't like each other, but none of them will leave. And one day, I think it's the aunt, I can't remember exactly, goes out into the garden and she sees her father, only her father has been dead for quite some time. And she gets it in her head that the apocalypse is about to happen, and the only thing that's going to be saved is this big house they live in and the grounds. So they decide to throw a big party for all the regular people in town, the servants and all of that, these people who just must absolutely love us because we're rich and we give them, we buy things from their stores and everything. Really, the people don't care about them in the slightest and think they're pretty weird. And so they have this big weird party, this apocalypse party. It's a really strange book, and this is another book I'd really like to reread because it was just so weird. It's just a weird book. Number 8, Firestarter by Prodigy, a book that has fire in the title or has an orange-red cover. So I just went with Firestarter by Stephen King, which is one of the few 70s and 80s novels of King's that I haven't read. But this novel is kind of special to me in a way, this particular book, because this sat on a kind of like a little cabinet in my grandparents' house for years and years and years, probably until I was 20, 21, something like that. It was always in the same spot. And one day I asked if I could have it because I'd never read Firestarter, and they gave it to me. So now it sits on a shelf at my house gathering dust. I really should read this someday because I know that I've read most of King's novels from the 70s and 80s, except for I haven't read Carrie, I haven't read Cujo, and I haven't read Firestarter. So, number 9, Humble by Kendrick Lamar, which is a song I've never heard as far as I know. A fiction or nonfiction book that left you stunned at the audacity of the main character or the writer. So, I'm almost a little nervous to show this one, but it's definitely audacious, like just the idea of it and writing it and publishing it. I'm not sure if this novel could be published today. And it's just pretty nuts. It's The Iron Dream by Norman Spinrad. This is from the 70s. I first heard about this book from Bookpilled about 2 years ago, and I just found a copy at a bookstore after that. Bookpilled is the one who got me into BookTube. Before I found him, I didn't know that BookTube even existed. So I owe him a debt in that way. And this is one of the first books I ever read because I saw it on BookTube. The plot of this book is that in an alternate timeline, when Hitler flunked out of art school or whatever, instead of doing all the terrible things he did in our real world, he moved to New York City. He became an illustrator for magazines and comic books, and then he became a science fiction writer, and he wrote a blockbuster science fiction novel that, you know, all these other science fiction writers just loved, and all these, you know, it was just this, you know, I'm not even sure what you could compare it to in this fictional world. I mean, maybe an Arthur C. Clarke novel or an Asimov. It's just crazy because it kind of takes all the real world events and puts them into this fictional story. You know, instead of Hitler doing all these things in the real world, he just condenses them into this science fiction novel. And it's just a crazy concept and a crazy book, and it's just outrageous. And just outrageous, you know. Prompt number 10 is to tag people. So I tag Aaron Facer, Book Ramble, Philip Hall at A Poet Reads to Write, That Reading Guy, Aaron Read a Book or Aaron Read a Book, Reading from the Depths, and Steve Donahue. So thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.